Good morning.
Good morning.
It's nice to have you here in SOHO again. And can you tell me what made you come to SOHO?
Well, I'd say I was following a woman.
You were following a woman.
Doesn't that often happen?
Yes.
Cherchez la femme. I went to college uptown and I took a seminar called Writing Art Criticism. And there was a woman in that class, a Hungarian woman, so she had an accent. And she lived in a big loft in SOHO with her husband. They had come over hidden in the trunks of cars. They'd crossed the border and were refugees. And so I moved in with her in her loft in SOHO. It was at 149 Wooster, next door to Paula Cooper.
Who was the woman?
Oh, it's Edith Dayak.
The famous Edith Dayak.
That's right. And in 1973, we started an art magazine here together. It was called Art Right Magazine, and we had it printed at XBD Press, which is around the corner on Green Street. It's not there anymore, of course. It's like condos and offices. And it was printed on newsprint, and we passed it out for free. We left it in galleries. And I don't know, we were art critics.
I still have a couple of issues.
Yes, it's historic now. We did, I think, 17 or 20 issues. We never could get it on a regular schedule. Our mentor was a man named Brian O'Doherty, an artist and a writer. And he told us at the beginning, he said, you know, you get this going, then maybe you can sell it for some money. And of course, instead of coming out like every month,
yes,
we would do theme issues, and each issue would get bigger and bigger, and it would take longer and longer for us to get around to publishing it. So we did a artist book issue, we did a video issue, we did a performance art issue. So you get the idea of what was happening in the 70s in SOHO. It was a time of interdisciplinary experimentation. You know?
So you started as a critic, but now you are a painter and a critic.
I was always both. I wanted to be an artist, but I managed to actually insert myself into the art world as a writer, as a critic, with this magazine. I didn't start painting until about 1979, and I had my first show in 1980 at Metro Pictures. Really? Yes.
Helene's gallery.
Yes, Helene and Janelle. They're my heroes.
I see.
And in 1980, I left the 70s behind and moved to the East Village. That's the end of the story. So I was actually only in SOHO for part of a decade, from 73 to 1980.
Oh, that's a long stretch. That's a good stretch.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I remember Food was the restaurant on the corner, and 112 Green Street was the alternative space where all the sort of older, cooler artists hung out. Holly Solomon had her gallery in SOHO, and she was really wonderful. Everybody loved Holly. And the 420 building on West Broadway was the place to be. I remember walking down West Broadway one sunny afternoon and hearing Phil Glass for the first time. He was doing a concert, and you could hear him out on the street. It was fantastic.
What was your earliest impression when you came here?
Well, my earliest impression of SOHO, I wish I could give you a reasonable impression. I was such an interior person, and I still am. You know, I'm focused on my own anxieties and insecurities. I am not paying attention to the world. That's something every day I tell myself I need to pay more attention. But you know, SOHO was this fabulous, old-fashioned area with cobblestone streets and beautiful buildings, and most notably, huge spaces where you could live. It was definitely a non-middle class way of life. You know, you had these big open spaces, you put in your own plumbing and your own fixtures and electricity, and you could live different than the way you were brought up. See, I come from the suburbs, so that's the main thing I remember. The big joke, oh, you can roller skate in the loft. We roller skate in the loft. The loft we lived in, I think, was 4,000 square feet.
Wow.
I think the rent was $160 a month. That was my share. There were three of us. My girlfriend, her husband, and me. It's very cozy.
And so what did you do here? when you say on a daily basis? What did you do here?
What did I do? You know, I don't know. It's hard to remember. I always had a job. I always had a job. I always had a low-paying job. So for a while, I was a typesetter.
Really?
That is to say, I worked for a newspaper called the Jewish Week American Examiner. Its offices were on 40th Street, and it was run by a retired Newsweek editor. And of course, it was very pro-Israel. And I worked there doing paste up and mechanicals. And that's just happens to be where we got the idea to start a magazine. That's where we borrowed the type when nobody was looking. We produced the entire magazine sort of as a fringe benefit, shall we say, of my job at the Jewish Week American Examiner. So I was earning $6 an hour, and I had more money than I knew what to do with.
I bet, yeah.
It was only a part-time job. And the rest of the time, you know, you ran around, you looked at art shows, you practiced your drinking, and you chased girls.
And where did you drink?
Well, there must have been bars in the neighborhood, right?
Right.
I remember a friend of mine, my drinking buddy, he called me up and he said, "Come on, meet me at this bar. It's the new hip bar. It's called Puffy's." It was down in Tribeca. And I thought, oh, that's the new hip bar. Turns out, of course, it was the bar closest to his house, which, you know, for an alcoholic, for a drinker, that's the new hip bar, the one closest to your house.
Right.
So the bars I remember, most of them were in Tribeca. Puffy's and Magoo's and Barnabas Rex and McGovern's, all those bars I drank at. Finelli's I would drink at some, but Finelli's was really sort of owned by an older crowd, I thought, plus it was always crowded. You know, Finelli's is, I think, down the road here on Prince Street, isn't it? Or is it on
Correct.
Spring Street?
No, it's on Prince.
There's Prince and Mercer.
Prince.
Still there?
I mean Prince, sorry.
Still there?
Still there.
Yeah, that's a real institution. It's about the last thing that's still there from the 70s, don't you think?
Yeah. Any particular art dealers that you sort of remember or are fond of or not fond of?
Well, Paula Cooper was wonderful, the most beautiful art dealer, and her gallery was right next to my loft. She was at 155 Wooster Street, and the loft was at 149 Wooster. And on occasion, when I'd regret that I had chosen the low-paying job of art critic, I'd think of one of Paula's associates, Doug Baxter. He's director of Pace Gallery now. And Doug went into this doorway at Paula's, and I went into this doorway at 149, and Doug became an art dealer, and I became an art critic. And if only I'd gone into that and he'd gone in mine, then I'd be a rich art dealer, and he could be the poor art critic. So I remember Paula. I guess I remember the girls, right? I remember Holly Solomon, like I said. I remember Mary Boone working the front desk at Bikert Gallery before she opened her own gallery. Bikert was, of course, run by Klaus Curtis, who's now a respected scholar. And I remember meeting Jeffrey Deitch sitting at the front desk of John Weber Gallery. He was the most enthusiastic art lover you'd ever meet, and he's still sort of like that today. You know, we were skeptical and basically negative art critics, and he loved everything. He loved everything. And all the dealers who were there, Leo Castelli was you know, the dean of the Soho art scene, an elegant Italian man with unerring taste, and Ivan Karp was the nicest. Ivan Karp, who ran OK Harris. We started a magazine and we had to sell advertising, and as you may know, Ivan never advertised anywhere. He didn't advertise in Art Forum or Art News or Art in America, but he advertised with us because he wanted to show his support. You know, Ivan was a very unusual guy. He had a big clientele. He was anti-snobby, even though he'd started his career at Caselli and discovered a lot of the pop artists. He had 3 galleries, or maybe 4 spaces in his gallery, 3 big rooms in his gallery, or maybe 4, and he'd have a different show in each one. And, there's so many dealers. I remember René Bloch's gallery. We were there when Joseph Beuys came to America for the first time since the Vietnam War. You know, he refused to set foot on U.S. soil because of the Vietnam War. So he finally came. He came in an ambulance, and he lived in the gallery for 2 weeks, 3 weeks with a coyote. Yes. That's very exciting. And I lived here. It was so long ago. It was more than almost 40 years ago. And I was fairly young. I was in my 20s, and I gotta say, I was searching most of the time. I didn't know, the most amazing thing to look back now is I didn't realize I was living through history. If I'd have known that I was making history, I would have paid more attention and kept more souvenirs. Luckily we have you, Paul, because you took all the pictures, so we can all remember it that way.
Good number of pictures.
And you know, the funny thing is that in 1980, I packed 2 suitcases and moved to the Lower East Side, and I left the entire 70s behind. I was starting a new life. I had had a breakup in my romance. That's what spurred my move. So I'd left the entire 70s behind. I kept no souvenirs. I hadn't given it a thought for decades until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Interest in the 70s started to arise. People started to ask me, what was it like? There'd be pictures, there'd be photographs. They'd say, who is this guy you're talking to? And I would say, I don't remember. But, you know, of course it was my beginnings. You know, I came down from college and started being an adult. And like I said, I learned how to bend an elbow and chase a skirt and actually make my way in the world, you know.
All in Soho.
That's where it all started. That's where it all started. It was really kind of beautiful, you know.
You've lived in all sorts of other places. Where was your first studio before Soho?
Well, my studio before Soho was on Fifth Avenue and between 22nd and 23rd Street, opposite the Flatiron Building. Mm-hmm. It was 30 feet wide and I guess 60 feet deep. Had a 14-foot ceiling. It was very elegant.
And what was it like being there?
It was really an industrial neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we started looking for other places, and Al heard about the Fluxus Group. They were able to stay in this area, which is zoned light industry, illegally, and openly in a building, daring the city to throw them out. And the city didn't throw them out, so then they started to sell buildings. They were like anti-establishment outfit. We went there and we saw this this building, and it looked great from the outside. I hoped it wasn't as good inside, and so we went in it, and it had 19 windows on the top, and Al said, I want the second floor because it has a higher ceiling. So I said, okay, Al, and I'll take the top. And then it was 2 buildings, so we got some more people together and finally bought the 2 buildings. And they were in really crummy shape. There was a big space heater in the corner here, which meant that the place was cold. The radios weren't adequate for the place. And what had happened, there had been a fire up here, and they replaced the walls and the ceiling very marginally. So it was just cement, half-inch cement on the outside, 14 inches of air, and a 1/4 of an inch sheetrock. It was very thin. The wind would come into the place. It was really cold and very hot in the summer because of the roof, big roof and no insulation, and the windows were pretty bad. And so that's the way it was. The interior of the place was a silk screen place where they made fabric for the factories that were on Broadway. It was part of the garment industry, this whole area, and that was declining. And so the floors were all full of some rubberized stuff that they use for the silk screen. And prior to that, the floor was used by machine shop, and they had some kind of a composite floor that absorbed shock for the workers, but the oil all went into the floor and kept coming out. And so we managed to clean the floor off. It was a job to get the stuff out. They had to scrape it to get the floor cleaned. And when we painted it, it just kept, the oil just kept coming up all over the place. And so in the front we put tiles. And when we got the building, I was in Utah, and it just said, Donald Grohl called up and said, we got a guy who can empty a loft out for $600. So I said, let him do it. And so we ended up taking a room away. We ended up putting a room exactly where it was a room. But it was efficient to do it that way. And there was a guy that Donald knew that contracted and fixed up the places, and it was pretty inexpensive. But you have to realize at that time, $1,000 was an abstraction. You know, it's like what $1 billion is today.
Right.
To me.
Right.
I had no understanding of what it was. And so we started, they started finishing. I did my place in 6 weeks, the loft. I forget his name, he did that, and then I did a lot of work. I put in all the doors. I hung all the doors, and I put in the racks, and I built the counters and all that. I did. So for 6 weeks I wasn't painting, I was just working here.
Yeah.
But that's all it took, and then it took about 10 years to finish it. You know.
Yeah.
Like the guy, there were artists doing the drywall, and they were inefficient. So at a certain point I said, why don't you just call it quits? And 10 years later, Jim Long got me a guy who did the World Trade Center, and he finished the plastering.
I see.
And then the wiring we changed. It was all on overhead, and at a point I took it all down and rewired the place. And then the kitchen, I couldn't stand the hoods on stoves, so that took about 10 years till I found a piece that I liked and had some pieces made. It took a long time to make it look like nothing happened.
Right. You bought the building with Al, and because I understand it's a co-op.
It was a corporation. It wasn't a co-op. We kept we figured that the people always follow the artists, so we wanted to keep the ground floor in common. So we made it a corporation with stocks. And on this, there's 2 buildings actually, and the one on this side had 2 units, and the one on the other side was 1 unit. That was the way we paid for the building. I bought 2 units, and people on the other side bought 1 unit, and they had that much stock. And that's how it worked. And the neighborhood was deserted at night, and it was becoming it was like an industrial slum. A lot of the lofts were used just for storage because the rents were so low. They stored fur and paper, and the streets were all full of fur and paper. And cabs didn't want to go down here because they thought they'd get mugged. And friends of ours didn't want to visit us because they thought it was a dangerous neighborhood because nobody was in it. But actually, it was more civilized than Fifth Avenue and 23rd Street. There were stores over a block away. And, and you can buy a newspaper and stuff like that. So it was a lot better than, in terms of that than before.
So what was the life like here on the street when you moved here? And was there anything happening?
No, there was nothing happening on the streets. I mean, it was us. There was a bar for Nelly's where we go to eat supper and run into artists, and from our building mostly. And there's a building across the street, and 2 of those became co-ops afterwards. And But I wasn't socially involved with any of those people.
And who were your artist friends at that time?
Well, there was Al and Johnny Button on the other side, and Donald was, I think, was in the Fishback Gallery, running the Fishback Gallery, and Antonakis was in the Fishback Gallery. And who was the other one? That was it in this building. And the other building was Johnny Button, Janakis, whom I never got friendly with. Sylvia Stone had the bottom, and she sold it. She was married to Al. And I don't know, that was about it.
Let me ask you, did the fact that you moved into this space influence your work formally?
No, well, it was pretty big on the Fifth Avenue place was big, and it had a higher ceiling. And I'd gone up to 10 by 20 feet there. And I got up to 30 feet here, but I could have done it there. But this is a better studio, it's got better light.
Did you feel isolated when you first moved here?
I felt isolated all my life.
Really, yeah?
Yeah, really.
Okay, so what is special about SOHO? What was special about SOHO then?
I don't know, no one bothered you. That was the big thing. And no one's bothering you. You could paint. That was it. You didn't have any, there wasn't very little no problems.
No. Was there a social life?
You always had a social life, yeah. Well, that is social life with, John was in a crowd, Johnny Butt was a crowd that I was in. And then that was part of Donald related to that. And so that was it. And then Al, we used to see Al a bit. So it was a continuation of the social life I had when I was in Fifth Avenue.
And what was the date that you moved in here? When was it?
I moved in '68.
I see. It was probably one of the first co-ops in Soho.
We were the second.
What was the first?
The first one's across the street.
I see. Okay. What did your wife think when you moved here?
Oh, she went along with it, yeah. I mean, you know, this is a lot less primitive than when we were living in Maine. I had to chop wood to eat breakfast and shovel shit from the outhouse. It was really primitive. So this was like much better than that. Actually, this is much better than anything I had since I left my home in Queens.
Did you grow up in Queens?
I grew up in Queens, yeah. We had a nice big house. It was a middle-class neighborhood with a nice big house. And coming to New York City, everything was crummy. And this was the first time we had that. You know, it was a new house out in Queens. And, and when I had this place, it was amazing to me. It was a shock to my system to have everything new.
And where was it?
Where I grew up?
In Queens.
I grew up in St. Albans, which is past Jamaica.
Right. Great. And so the neighborhood has changed a great deal. What do you make of that?
I don't care. That's the character of New York.
Which is?
Yeah, the character of New York has changed. I mean, you can't even take the time to think that something's ugly because they'll replace it with an uglier one if they can make 5 more percentage points.
Yes.
That's it, accept it.